Welcome to Buy, Sell, Hold, the Sports Car Market Podcast. Market experts and car friends for over 30 years, Keith Martin and Mark Green have come together through their mutual love for collector cars. Keith and Mark will take you on a ride into the collector car market, talking with industry experts, helping you navigate your collector car journey so that you know when to make your own decisions to buy, sell, or hold.
Hello, I'm Mark Green from the Cars Yeah podcast.
And I'm Keith Martin from Sports Car Market Magazine.
We want to welcome you to Buy, Sell, Hold, what we like to call is the essence of collecting, and this is show number 12. So, Keith, how are you today?
I am ready to roll. I want to run outside and get in an old car and just head towards the coast.
That sounds like fun. Well, you'll be happy. I did drive my old car yesterday, my 33-year-old Porsche. I took it for a drive. I got it out. It's sunny here. I didn't eat a burrito in the car. I'm still going to have to work on that concept with you and your pizza and your kid in your car. But I'm getting there, Keith. I'm getting there. You're starting to loosen the wires a little bit.
So, Mark, when you brought your car home, did you put it back into that hermetically sealed capsule that you have in your garage?
I don't have one of those, but I do wipe it down. I put the cover on it. I put the battery tender on it. It always goes back the way it is. So, I do take care of my car. But I tell you, I came home with a smile. It was a great fun. It was a beautiful day. Love driving that car. So there you go. You inspired me, my friend. What we're going to do here is we have a guest coming on the show who's somebody very special. He's been in the Concours judging arena for a long time. He's actually the chairman of the International Chief Judge Advisory Group they call ICJAG. And I want to ask you, Keith, your opinion about the value of taking a collector car to a Concours event and how that perceives value to maybe a potential buyer when you're going to sell the car. You've been a judge, a chief judge. You've been MC at so many Concours events. What say you?
Well, Mark, I think it all depends on the event and the caliber of the judging. Saying that your car was People's Choice at the Kalamazoo Fun Fest isn't the same as first in class at Pebble Beach.
Yes.
I think that the higher the caliber of the judging, the more specific, the higher the quality of the judges, then the more a potential buyer for your car will feel like this car has been vetted, and therefore I can buy it with a little more assurance.
Absolutely. Now, you've been chief judge at many events from very prestigious events, of course. So give our listeners maybe a little idea of the involvement, what you need to do when you go to a Concours to get a car prepared properly. But more importantly, what you told me in our pre-show chat, it's what they're going to learn through that judging experience that is really adding value.
Yeah, I am not a Concours guy. I am a user. So I've only entered my cars in Concours a couple of times. For the people who want to enter them, again, it's really a monumental process at a high level Concours because the car is cleaner and neater than it ever was when it left the showroom. There's another factor to that, and that's correctness. If you're entering in a Concours, you want the correct spark plug wires. You want the correct hose clamps. All these things that might not matter to driving would matter when a judge is looking at your car. And I'll tell you why. Like if I'm at Amelia, for instance, we're judging and somebody has the wrong hose clamps on their car, and you give them points off, and somebody else would say, well, why points off for the wrong hose clamp? And what I would say is, if we don't give them points off, we're telling everybody who went to the trouble to put the right hose clamps on their car that they didn't have to bother.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Point well taken. I think it's great. Well, I know when we had Aaron Weiss here on Buy, Sell, Hold a couple of weeks back, I mean, he is a prolific Concours attendee. I mean, he goes to a lot of Concours. He's taken a lot of cars to Concours. So he's a great example of somebody that goes to that very high level with the incredibly special cars he has to make sure everything's accurate. Let me ask you this from your perspective. Is it worth it to go to a Concours? Take all the trouble to bring your car to a Concours.
Mark, is it worth it to spend $250 for a bottle of wine when you could get $2 chuck?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So my point is that it's a personal thing. When I had my 996 Turbo, 36,000 mile car, the one that Bradley ate pizza in.
You're going to keep saying that, aren't you?
I know.
Oh, I can't even talk.
Nice, clean car. The man I sold it to, Michael Pierce.
I know Michael.
Is very particular about his cars, and he went through that car and made it cleaner and more beautiful than I ever imagined it could be. The car just shines. Well, that works for him, and he couldn't have the car any other way. If you're a guy who likes to show off the perfection and correctness of your car, and you're willing to put up with being judged, so somebody nitpicking your car, that doesn't bother you, then I think Concours is worth it. But it's a totally personal thing.
Right, exactly. Well, today we're going to have fun with a special guest who's coming on the show who's going to talk a little bit about that, but more about the process of buying, selling, and holding cars, a gentleman who's done that many, many times. We'll be back in just a minute to talk with our guest. His name is Ed. But first, a special offer from Keith's team at Sports Car Market. We'll be right back. Mark Green here. I have subscribed to Sports Car Market magazine for decades. While I've dropped most of my other car magazine subscriptions, Sports Car Market is the one I'll never let go. It's a hold. Getting it monthly in my mailbox brings a huge smile to my face. Sports Car Market magazine is filled with great articles and market updates on collector car values. It's a virtual treasure trove of value. Even the advertisements are fun to watch. Boy, I've got a deal for you. You're going to get $10 off your print subscription simply by using the code BSH on their website. Go to sportscarmarket.com/BSH, use the code BSH, and get $10 off your print subscription of Sports Car Market magazine. That's a deal. That's code BSH at sportscarmarket.com/BSH and get $10 off your print subscription today.
So, Mark, who will we be talking with today?
We're going to be talking with a friend of both your and mine, Ed Gilbertson, here on Buy, Sell, Hold. Ed Gilbertson is the chairman of the International Chief Judge Advisory Group, known as ICJAG. It is also the president of the jury Salon Prive Concour d'Elegance, a role that pulled him out of retirement to handle all the judging at this event that is held at the Blenheim Palace in the UK. Ed has been active in the car hobby forever, over 45 years. He is the Chief Judge Emeritus for the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance and continues to serve as a senior member of the Pebble Beach Selection Committee. He's also the Chief Judge Emeritus for the Palm Beach Cavallino Classic. That's a marvelous event. And the Ferrari Club of America. And in addition, he was Chief Judge for the Legend of the Motorcycle International Concours and multiple shows across the country. So, Ed, my friend, how are you doing today? Welcome to Buy, Sell, Hold.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I've always enjoyed talking to both you and Keith. Well, I'm ready to go when you are.
All right.
Hello, Ed, and welcome to Buy, Sell, Hold. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. Thank you. I'm honored to be with you guys.
Well, it's going to be fun. Let's start off with this. If you could describe the collector car market today in just one word, what would that word be and why?
Well, I think the word I would use would be sliding, because I think people sometimes forget that the car market goes up and down, just like the housing market and the stock market and lots of other things. The question of supply and demand. And taking a look at how the prices have gone, I think, except for the star cars at the top of the pyramid, I think things have been in a pretty steady slide now going into the third year.
Do you see that continuing, Ed? What do you think will happen in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, as I indicated, Keith, it seems to me the market, except for the cars at the top of the pyramid, have been sliding now for the last 2 or 3 years. I think that will continue because we're going through some fundamental changes in the car world. And I tell people if they've got a, quote, collector car they're thinking about selling, they should get to it. On the other hand, if they're thinking about buying one, wait a while. It's probably going to be less expensive.
So that's talking about the market in general. Now let's move on to 3 cars in particular, 3 vehicles in your life. One you have purchased, one you have sold, and one that you would never let go of. Let's start with the memorable buy. A car that was very special to you, how you decided to buy it, how you chased it down, and how you finally closed the deal.
Well, I tell you, I think for most of us, our first car is pretty special occasion. It certainly was for me. I was already riding motorcycles out in the Midwest since I was 11 years old, and I got a hankering for a car. So I was only 13 years old. I found a clapped out 40 Ford that didn't run. It cost me $50. I was in junior high at the time. I had a paper route and I sold ice cream bars where for every one I sold, I got a penny. And I saved up my money for that $50. My parents let me have it, I think, because they never thought I would get it running. Surprise, I did get it running. And that's where I learned about, how to work on cars and how to work on engines and the like. And of course, a good old Ford V8, that's a good engine to learn on. And then I proceeded, because this was back in it was 1950 when I got that car. And of course, a big hot rod era. And so I got a second paper route and saved up my pennies and proceeded to hot rod that 40 Ford as best I could. There were no aftermarket manufacturers in the day to speak of. There was some speed equipment, dual intakes and things like that available. But for the most part, we went to junkyards. We went to the dump to scrounge up things that we thought we could use to either customize or hop up our cars. So that was a very special thing to me, that 40 Ford. And of course, it left decades ago. That was the start of it.
It's a wonderful story. I love the penny for every popsicle sold. That certainly dates all of us. But I think the ambition you had to get that first car and raise $50. Think how many popsicles you have to sell, come up with $50, and how many papers you got to throw. That's incredible.
We did, and then of course didn't have any money. And so, my gosh, when I would blow a tire, honest to God truth, I'd head for the dump and I would look for a couple of tires that somebody had thrown away because they didn't think they were any good anymore. And I would haul those home and they put them on. They would last a short time. And then I'd look for some more tires. And the same with a battery. When I needed a battery, of course, I wasn't the only one doing this, but there just wasn't, we couldn't afford those things, but we loved the cars. So I would look for an abandoned automobile and see if there was a battery in it, and then lug it home and sometimes get a charge out of it. And that would last for a little while. So that's how we kept things going back in the 50s.
You've come a long way, baby, to the lawns at Pebble Beach. That's pretty cool. Well, let's move up in scale a little bit and talk about a significant vehicle that you have owned, something that you worked really hard to get, a significant car that's worthy of a Concours lawn somewhere. Kind of walk us through what that is. But this is a car that you let go. This is a car you finally decided to sell. Tell us about it. How did you decide on that selling price? And looking back, are you sorry you let it go?
Well, I've got an interesting story there. It took me a long time, even though Ferraris were much more reasonable back in those days. It was still a lot of money for a lot of us who had to stretch to get one. And at the time, I had gone on to a little Austin Healey, but the Ferraris cost quite a bit more than that. Finally, after a number of years, gosh, it was a good 20 years after that start with the clapped-out 40 Ford, I managed to get a Ferrari Lusso. This is a beautiful car. My life is set. Well, as most of us know, the tempting thing about Ferraris, the minute you get one and you say, oh man, this is all I'll ever need, you look each way and you see other Ferraris that are quite different, but just as striking and exciting. So I decided that I would like to get a Spider California, and a lot more reasonable than they are today, I assure you. I looked at a couple. They weren't exactly what I wanted. They weren't quite right. And I heard there was one available down in Coconut Grove, Florida, near Miami. And a fella had gotten a Spider California, which needed restoration. It was all apart in his garage. He hadn't gotten around to putting it back together, and he was ready to sell it. And so I decided to go look at it. I flew over from California to Florida, and I walked into his garage, and I said, oh, my gosh. the car was completely apart. The engine was completely apart. I mean, it was just bits and pieces. And so I got to looking at it, tried to determine whether it was all there. It seemed to be all there. But the thing that I noticed, which was quite unusual, and not much was known about the Spider Californias in those days, the different sorts and so forth, that it was an alloy car. Well, I hadn't seen a Spider California. Noticed that it had a quick filler in the center of the trunk. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. Anyway, long story short, he was willing to, of course, the cars were quite reasonable. This was back in the 70s. So I decided I would get it. Felt pretty sure most of it was there, which it was. I hired a one-way truck, and I hauled it back to California myself. And that was quite an adventure, because I called my wife, Sherry, and I said, well, I've looked at this car. It's all apart, but there's something special about it. It's alloy. It's got some special features. I don't know what it's all about, but I'm going to buy it. I'll see you in about a week. Well, I rented this truck, took off, and loaded the car up in it in pieces and all of this sort of thing. Anyway, that was a real series of misadventures, which a lot of us have hauling these old cars across the country, and I'll have to write about it someday. But, the truck broke down. A trailer that I was hauling another car on for somebody, that broke down. I blew tires. It was just a nightmare.
Well, obviously, you got that car home, you built it, but you let it go. You sold it. And that's what I'm interested in here today, is the selling part of that car. Why you let it go? What were the circumstances around that? And again, looking back, are you sorry? And you got to tell us what made that car so special with that center gas filler in the back. I think I know the answer to that.
Well, I'll tell you, I did get it back to California. And of course, I was really getting deep into Ferraris and doing a fair amount of research. In fact, I was the first one, I believe, to write an article about the so-called factory competition Spider Californias. It was in an early issue of Cavallino. And I poked around and talked to a lot of people and checked records. And I determined that the factory had indeed built a small number of alloy Spider Californias for racing. And I identified that there were likely 10 long wheelbase models that had been built and 3 short wheelbase. And gosh, that was done, the early days of Cavallino, decades ago. And I did enough research, because to this day, and we got lots of historians and researchers out there, they've never found any beyond that. And so I quickly determined that 1699, my car was one of the 10 factory competition Spiders produced in alloy with quick fillers and lightened frames and all the rest of it, hotted up engine, 10 millimeter cam, so forth. And then further discovered that it had been raced at Sebring in 1960 by George Constantine and Robert Publicker. It had been further raced in Nassau Speed Weeks by Wolfgang von Trips. It had been raced at a number of other tracks in the East Coast, Lime Rock and the rest of them. So I said, wow, I not only got the Spider California here, but a pretty darn special car. And I got it together. We did a lot of work ourselves back in those days. Anyway, got it all together, had a lot of fun with it. Didn't have to worry too much about them in those days. They weren't worth the millions they are today. And drove that car all over the place in club events, ran it at the Virginia City Hill Climb, ran it out at Sears Point, and just had a great time with it. And I said, probably going to keep this car, love it. But I'd owned it for quite a number of years. And then that big run-up started in the 80s. I'm sure both of you guys will remember that. And the cars really started accelerating far beyond what us old guys had paid for them in the day. And I was not ready to sell that car. I had a couple other Ferraris. I'd managed along the way to get Eugenio Castellotti's Mille Miglia car, which was a 1950 166 Touring Barchetta, lovely little car with a good race history. So I had 2 V12 Ferraris with good racing history. And I didn't have to sell either one of them. but the offers started coming in, and every darn week, I'm sure Keith remembers this, the frenzy. I mean, I was getting calls on both of those cars. And every time I got a call, both of them were up another $100,000 or $200,000. And then it started moving up into seven figures. And I said to Sherry, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe what's happened here." I said,
jackpot.
Maybe I ought to let one of these go. Long story short, I did sell it, but I wasn't real anxious to. I remember getting a call from a man in Germany who had heard about my car. He wanted to buy it. And I said, "Well, I'm really not for sale." He says it's a but, and then he jumped at a couple $100,000 more. And I said, "You really going to pay that much for the car?" It was right at the top of the market. Some people said when that car sold, somebody rang a bell. It was right at the top of the market at the end of '88. And he said, "Here, I'll pay you this for the car." I said, "Are you kidding?" He said, "No, I'm not kidding." I said, "I tell you what, I'm going to give you the information of my Wells Fargo bank account, and when the money arrives in the account, you can come and get the car." Well, next morning, Sherry checks our bank account. She says, Ed, the whole fit in at our account. I said, "You're kidding, he did it." And the car sat in our garage for about 3 weeks, and then Lufthansa arrived and hauled it back to Germany. That car went through a couple ownership changes, is now in the John Shirley collection, a perfect home for it. But people say, "Aren't you sorry you sold your Spider California," when they see the prices that one will fetch today, even an alloy car? I said, "Not really, because you have to remember that I sold that car over 30 years ago, and I sold it at the absolute top of the market. It was the highest price that had ever been offered for a Spider California. And I said, if you consider the time value of money and a modest discount factor and move it forward to today's dollars, the car is selling for the same thing today that it sold for over 30 years ago. So no, I'm not sorry I sold it. I went on to have other cars, and it's wound up in a very good home. I'm delighted that it wound up with John Shirley. And so that's my story on this special Spider California that we had.
It's a wonderful story, and I'll let our listeners know John Shirley's going to be a future guest here on Buy, Sell, Hold, so we'll get to hear his side of the collecting story. We're going to take a short break and thank our sponsors. Keith's team has another special offer for you, and our sponsor is a little message for you as well. We'll be right back. I've been subscribing to Sports Car Market magazine for decades, and it shows up like clockwork in my mailbox every month. But what about when I'm on the road? Did you know that digital subscriptions to Sports Car Market are just $2.50 a month when you sign up with the promo code DIGITAL50? That's less than a cup of coffee. You get 50% off regular price just for listening here to Buy, Sell, Hold. Plus, digital subscribers receive instant access to a year's worth of back issues and the exclusive Insider's Guide, including the 2020 Insider's Guide to the beautiful Amelia Island Concours, and all the spring auctions as well. No more boredom while sitting at the airport or on your flight. To get your Sports Car Market digital subscription at this discount, go to sportscarmarket.com/digital50. Your order will automatically get you the 50% off. What a deal. Go and sign up today at sportscarmarket.com/digital50. All right, we're back. We're going to have Keith ask this next question about most memorable vehicle that you'll never let go. Take it away, Keith.
Ed, let's talk about a car that you own that is so special that you can't imagine yourself ever selling it. What would that be?
I have an answer there. It's a car that I acquired much later, but I'll just say I don't like to talk values of cars because I never bought any of my cars for what they might be worth. So I won't get into the exact figures. But an interesting story about that Spider California is that I sold it for 100 times more than I paid for it.
Nice. Nicely done. If we could only all do that with every car we've ever owned.
Well, don't we wish? So that one really worked out. Well, a car that I will never sell. Well, I'll tell you, I've talked about developing a very early interest in cars, starting with the old Ford, and eventually saved up enough that I was able to get that Ferrari Lusso, and then later that Spider California. And then I got very active in the club. As you guys know, I was chief judge for the Ferrari Club of America for over 20 years, and I got really enmeshed in Ferraris. But one car that I always wanted was a Shelby 427 Cobra. But I got so deep into Ferraris, I never got around to getting one. And so I guess it's been about a dozen years ago now, I sold one of my cars, and as you get car guys know, when you sell a car and you have a space in the garage, pretty soon it's going to be filled. I said to myself, well, what am I going to do now? I mean, I've fortunately had the Ferraris I wanted at a time when they were affordable, reasonable cost, but I never got around to getting my 427 Cobra. About a dozen years ago, I got a CSX 427 Cobra, and I love that car. If I had, I always admired them, loved the way they sound, had wanted one, but had never driven one. And once I got that 427, I thought, oh, holy smokes, man, if I knew how much fun this was going to be, I'd have gotten it before this. So to answer your question, before I go on too long, a car that I would never sell. I often get a question, like a lot of us do, who have had a number of cars. Say, Ed, you've had a lot of nice cars. If you could only keep one, which one would it be? And I think most people expect me to select one of the Ferraris, but I say without hesitation, the Shelby 427 Cobra. They said, really? I said, yeah, and I'll tell you why. I love motorcycles, hot rods, and sports racing cars, and the 427 is all three of those rolled into one.
No kidding.
I must tell you, they're not for everybody. You really got to be careful. You don't want a floor one coming off the line, that's for sure. And it squirrels through every gear, and it's great fun. But that's the car that I would keep.
Ed, do you remember the very first time you drove that car and what it was like to be behind the wheel knowing it was your 427?
Oh, I was so excited, Keith. I'd wanted one for such a long time, and they are so powerful, and of course all the weight is in the front end. But I took off in that car. Now, I had been warned by a couple of the Cobra gurus whose advice I had sought, said, well, we know you're excited about getting one. We know you like motorcycles, hot rod, but be careful of that car coming off the line. And so I had been forewarned. But my first ride in that car, oh gosh, I took off slowly, and then I started going through the gears, and it squirreled through every gear, and it was all it was squirreling around, and that powerful engine. This was set up for track use, so those big 4-into-1 side pipes are pretty much open pipes. It's just glorious. I don't have to be going 120 miles down the road in that car like you sometimes do in a Ferrari to really have fun with it. You can burble along, and I just listen to the music of those big open pipes, and that car shakes and rattles. And in fact, we name all of our cars, and the name of that car is Johnny Be Good. And we're trying to think of a name for it. The first time it sat in the garage here, we're having our cocktail trying to think up a name for the car. Nothing is really hitting. And I had a rock and roll station on in the background. Chuck Berry comes on playing Johnny Be Good. That's it. Johnny Be Good. Bad boy rock and roll car, which certainly is.
Wonderful story.
So let's talk about a car you don't own. Something that you think would be the ideal collector car that you could use for everything. That you looked at it, it was beautiful, it had great mechanicals, and you could hardly wait to jump into it. What would that ideal collector car be?
Oh, I tell you, Keith, I wish I'd discovered these days back in the days when the used Ferraris were selling for pretty reasonable prices. And I've certainly since come to appreciate them. I have seat time in them. I've helped put together 6,000-mile international reunion tours for these cars. I love them. I wish I'd discovered them back in the day. The Alpha 8Cs.
Uh-huh.
The 8Cs
there you go again.
are just spectacular cars. I never realized what great cars they were until I was asked to help organize an Alfa Romeo 8C tour. And then Sherry and I have helped organize several more, as well as for GTOs and Testarossas. We've been very lucky that way to be able to do those things in addition to the Concours. But I love those 8Cs. I'm a sports racing guy. I would tend to go after, one of the open 8C competition cars, but something like an Alpha 8C 2900, oh my gosh, those are glorious cars. And I guess that's one car that I'm not going to have because they're way too expensive. Now they're up there in the millions, along with some of the other great Ferraris and Bugattis. But I was astounded the first time I took an 8C out. Here's a car that was built back in the 20s and 30s. It's almost like driving a modern automobile, those 2900s.
So, Ed, let me ask you, because you've driven the Cal Spider, you've driven Alpha 8Cs. What's the fundamental difference between being behind the wheel of an 8C or a V12 Ferrari?
Wow, that's an interesting question, and one I haven't been asked. Of course, I love the sounds of both of them. They're both spectacular cars. I would say, Ferraris are great cars. I love them, and I've been fortunate enough to have them. But you really get the thrill of a Ferrari when you get it out on an open road where you can really let it go and really run the revs way up. Then you really can see what a Ferrari will do. I would guess the 8Cs, you don't have to ring them out quite that much to get the thrill of the ride. As far as the technology, not a whole lot of difference. Those early post-war Ferraris was basically pre-war technology. The Alpha 8Cs, of course, pre-war. You're talking kind of cars we're talking about built in the 30s. Not a great deal of difference. As far as technology, you get the thrill of the drive with both of them. I don't know. I'd be interested in how you feel, Keith. You've probably driven both. But to me, to get the real thrill of Ferrari, you really have to have it out in the open roads in the middle of nowhere and then really let it go. And you can do that with an Alpha also. But I think you could probably have just as much fun in an Alpha where you don't have it run at full bore.
So Ed, let's go back to the market for a second, and let's talk about today's market and how you're so involved with judging with ICJAG. Do you think the market has any effect on the concours and the entries and kind of the configuration of that world?
Oh, I think what we have to keep in mind there, Keith, is the generational shift of interest. And you've talked about that in your magazine. As each new generation comes along, their dream cars are, in most cases, going to be different than the dream cars of the previous generation, because we all harken back to our high school days when we first got interested in cars, and we couldn't afford the cars that we really wanted, but we had pictures of them and posters, and we dreamed about them. And so when you finally got to a point in life, you went out and got that dream car. So I think you have the generational shift in interest, which occurs with every generation. But this one's going to be pretty dramatic, I feel, because we're moving into some real fundamental changes in the car world. And we're getting into the self-driving cars. We're getting into the all-electrics. We're even with the internal combustion cars. I mean, I don't find the new Ferraris near as exciting to drive as the old V12s and the older 8s, because they're so loaded with electronics and computer technology, the cars almost drive you instead of you driving them. In addition, you can't work on these newer machines, Ferraris or otherwise. You can't even change the darn oil on them. That's going to have an impact on, I think, the collector car world. I think we have to be paying attention to it as far as how it's going to change the concours scene. I do head up this international organization, as you fellows know, International Chief Judge Advisory Group, and we're talking about that because you have to plan ahead. And I could probably talk and brainstorm a fair amount about this subject. We don't have time, but we're going to go through some real changes. I even envision the day when a major concours will want to bring in some special car from a foreign country. And that's a big effort and a lot of expense and time. I think as rapidly as we're moving into, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, the time will come where if a show wants to have a particular car from halfway around the globe at their show, they will bring it there, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, put on the gloves, put on the mask, you walk up the car and it's like it's there. You even be able to touch it.
My gosh, yeah. You paint an interesting picture for us, Ed. I'm envisioning the day that the winning cars go over the podium with no drivers in them.
Happen, couldn't it?
Yeah, I think so. You know, Ed, we could talk with you for hours. It's such a delight, and I really want to thank you for spending some time with us here on this new podcast, Buy, Sell, Hold. I want to remind the listeners, if you'd like to listen to a couple talks I've had with Ed, he's been a guest on my Cars Yeah podcast. You can go back and find those on the Cars Yeah website. Ed, you've taken us, like you always do, on a very nice ride today, a treasure trove of knowledge. I want to thank you for sharing your insights. One last question for you. If there was one little piece of wisdom or guidance you might offer somebody when it comes to buying, holding, and selling their cars, what would it be?
Well, I think in all cases, and I've heard other people say this, that don't buy a car for what it might be worth someday. Or don't buy a car because your buddies are buying it, or you see that it's a very popular choice. No, our relationship with our cars, our motorcycles, is a very close personal relationship for those of us that really have the passion. And so any car I've ever bought, I never gave any consideration to what it might be worth. I never considered it an investment. I considered it a new member of the family that's coming into my life. And when it came time, and I always kept my cars for quite a long time because I bought them because I wanted them and wanted to drive them. And so if it comes time to sell and the market treats you well, so be it. If it doesn't, you've got the many years and priceless memories with your pal, your car. And so, and I would only add one thing that I always said in all of my judges' meetings through the years, because people get this idea that if they're showing a car, they can't drive it. I think that's bizarre. And so I always said to my judges, let's remember that cars are meant to be driven. Motorcycles are meant to be ridden. We do not deduct for evidence of use, but you will deduct for over restoration. And that's the kind of thing we try to do to promote proper preservation and correct restoration for these wonderful cars.
There you go. Well said. And I know that listeners out there, if you want to learn more about what Ed has done with ICJAG, you can find the website at icjag.org. It's an interesting website. It's really spectacular. You can go there and learn all sorts of things. Ed, you've been great today. I really want to thank you for spending some time with us. Listeners, again, you can find the show notes page for today's show on the Sports Car Market website or the Cars Yeah website. Everything is there. Ed, thanks for being so generous today with your time, your expertise. It's always a pleasure talking with you, my friend.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to talk to you guys, and we'll look for a time when we can share a brew and we'll tell some more stories.
I'd just like to get a ride in your Cobra. Is that possible someday, Ed?
Yeah, you hang on for dear life.
You heard it here first, so
I'm ready.
I'll be in line. Hey, thanks, Ed. This has been great. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Take care. Hey, Mark Green here. If you love the Buy, Sell, Hold podcast, you'll want to listen to my Cars Yeah podcast, where over 5 years, I've interviewed over 1,475 inspiring automotive enthusiasts. You'll have free access to my guest shows 5 days a week. These are amazing people who share their world around cars, trucks, and motorcycles. I take a deep dive into their businesses, and they share with you how they've wrapped their passion for vehicles into their lives. Plus, go to the carsyeah.com website and hit the free book button, and I'll email you my free Filler Up book. It's an ebook filled with beautiful fuel filler fun and inspiring quotes from my past guests. Once subscribed, you'll get my weekly blog as well. You can find all the Cars Yeah shows on carsyeah.com or on any mobile device using your podcast app. Just search for Cars Yeah Podcast and subscribe today. That way you'll get both Buy, Sell, Hold with Keith and me and the Cars Yeah Podcast delivered right to your mobile device or your computer. Thanks for listening.
We hope to have shed some light today on the collector car market. You can listen to all the Buy, Sell, Hold podcasts at sportscarmarket.com and carsyeah.com. You'll find hundreds of inspiring automotive enthusiasts on the Cars Yeah website as well. Be sure to log into sportscarmarket.com and subscribe to Keith's SCM weekly newsletter. You'll find digital issues, insider event guides, and price guides, along with our Platinum database, column profiles, classifieds, and many other resources. Join Keith and Mark next week to hear from another automotive industry leader who will help you determine when to buy, sell, or hold.